So every gun case in Chicago where someone a gun is seized from, both Chicago Police Department and the ATF look at the case together. Someone from your office and someone from my office do intake together. We're not having a tug of war over, I want this, I want this. Where does it fit best? And what we try to do is we hold the federal penalties, the tough federal penalties for an armed career criminal, someone with 3 prior convictions for violence, caught with a gun, faces 15 years without parole. Well, let's not impose that randomly. Let's figure out who the people most likely to be dangerous. So if there's a person who has that kind of record, who's extremely dangerous, then let's select that person for federal prosecution. In addition to that, let's look at the gang picture. And if there's a particular gang that's causing a lot of violence in an area, you may have different assistants in different courtrooms prosecuting different members of the gang. My office could have different assistants prosecuting different members of the gang. And what we are doing now is saying, let's make sure we have a handle on all of this so that some apparently individual gun case against a particular defendant who is a leader of a gang can be looked at as part of our larger package, and then we'll decide, does it make more sense for your office to do it, my office to do it, or sometimes a joint venture where you assist my office in federal court, or we provide assistance or witnesses to cases in Cook County. And so on the law enforcement side, we're trying to get ourselves lined up where we're taking our resources and directing them at the people most likely to be violent. The second part of that, which I think people don't see, is that when we do prosecute someone who's dangerous and put them away for 15 years without parole, that's not really a victory. That's a partial victory. It's much better than having that person on the street killing someone, and particularly killing a juvenile. So in that sense, it's better. But they still committed a crime in the first place. And one of the things that happens sometimes is defendants are brought to federal court. They find out they're part of the Project Safe Neighborhoods prosecution program. They realize they're facing 15 years without parole. And a light bulb goes off and they say, you know, I kept doing this stuff and now, you know, my life is ruined. And not just their life is ruined, but the lives of the people in their family and friends around them. And what we're trying to do is have the light bulb go off before they pick up a gun. And so what we do are what called parolee forums, and we gather people released from the Illinois Department of Corrections into a room where there's an assistant state's attorney from your office, an assistant U.S. attorney from my office, Chicago police officer, an ATF agent, who basically read the facts of life to the people who are being released on parole, saying, you're going back to your community, we wish you the best, but just so you understand, if you're caught with a gun, this is what's going to happen to you. And you want them to have that light bulb go off before they pick up the gun. And then we balance that with a message from a ex-convict, often a parolee, one fellow who was on death row, who talks very bluntly to these people being released into the community about what life's like. And I think, frankly, they have a more effective message. They need to hear from us that we're out there and we're prepared to prosecute. They listen to this person, and then we have community service providers, educators, people with job training, drug detox programs to say, here's your chance to do something else. Now, I know a lot of people might think, well, that sounds like a lot of happy talk, not so happy talk, or straight talk, but how much can you do in an hour sitting around a room with 30 people who don't want to be there? And we've been fortunate to have some very professional academics study this program, and their conclusion is they took a control group and the group that our offices are working together with CPD and ATF on and said, what difference do we see in the reoffending rates? And for spending 1 hour in that meeting, offenders are 30% less likely to reoffend. And to me, that's a staggering number, because if you think about the resources that happen when we prosecute someone, how much we spend on the prosecution, how much we spend on the criminal defense, how much we spend on the court system, and then how much money we spend incarcerating them, and add the human cost of how much time that person is spending in jail and the impact it has on their family, and compare that cost to what it costs to have a group of 4 law enforcement officers speak to an hour for a room full of 30 people. So we're trying to do that, and so we both have a carrot and a stick approach. We prosecute people who are being violent and commit a crime, but we're also trying to basically scare them straight beforehand. And the last part of that is law enforcement can work together, but the community is a huge part of this. And we're trying to marry up with the community. And one of the things I think people may not appreciate is people sitting in a room, state and federal prosecutors, federal law enforcement, CPD commanders saying, we've got money to spend. We've been given a grant from Washington about let's go after gangs. And we have particularly violent gangs we have to look at. And people are sitting around and saying, well, this one is in this neighborhood, this one's in that neighborhood. What kind of social service programs are in those neighborhoods? Because we have funding for that too. limited funding, but funding. Let's try and prosecute a gang that's causing violence in the community, where there's a community group that's going to step up, and when the gang's removed and these young teens or youths are looking for something to do, they have a program that actually might divert them away from the gang life rather than removing a gang and having another gang fill in. So it's a very important part of what we do. It's been done relatively quietly, but I think it's very, very important that people understand law enforcement is trying to stop people from committing crime, not just catch them afterward.
It's extremely important, and it's clear that no one superintendent or state's attorney or U.S. attorney is going to be able to end all the violence, particularly the gang violence, the gun violence. So it's really important that we all work together, and I think Project Safe Neighborhoods is a perfect example of that, because the state's attorney's office works hand in hand with the U.S. attorney's office and also all the federal and local law enforcement. But I think the message, or do you have a message to the community, to the business community? Because I think there's ways that the community outside of law enforcement could get involved with Project Safe Neighborhoods. Am I right?
Yes.
And can you tell us that?
Yes, I think that one of the biggest things we have to do is to take teens who have they can go right or they can go left, and try to show them that it's not crazy for them to think that I could get a job, a successful job downtown. That when I look at these buildings downtown, I see people going to work in suits, that they could be one of them, that they could actually be a law enforcement officer or a state's attorney or an assistant U.S. attorney. So number one, taking people at a very impressionable stage in their life and giving them internships and showing them that there is a way where you can be successful that doesn't involve following someone who's got a flashy car in a gang. The second part of that, the harder part, but the most important part, is reentry. I think we do a very good job at those forums of letting people know, you go back down the path of gangbanging, here's what the consequences are. And I think the fact that we can reduce crime by 30% from that group tells you something. But you also have to recognize that if we shake those people up and they say, I don't want to go back and do this, I don't want to go to prison for that long, I don't want to be away from my family, they have to have an alternative, which means a job. And I think there's lots of people who watch TV, generally get angry at the violence, say, why doesn't someone do something about it? They want to view it maybe as a law enforcement problem, and it's in part a law enforcement problem, and law enforcement has to keep doing better and better, but it's a society problem. And they have to be able to say, you know what, I'm willing to take a chance and take someone who's made a mistake, gone to prison, paid the price, and is willing to work. And I think what people would find out is there are a lot of people quietly doing this who not only find that this works out, they actually find that there's often a management structure imposed by organizations on parolees, that it's easier for them to deal with parolees as workers than sometimes other workers. So they're doing it for business reasons. I think they often don't want to advertise and say, we have convicted felons working here, but it's working out well. Well, if we have tens of thousands of convicted felons on parole in the community, if we write them off and say, you'll never work a job in Chicago, then what do we think is going to happen? We all know it's going to happen. Right. If they can't work, they're going to go back to their old ways of doing things. And I think we need to be aware of that, and we need to step up and say, okay, you can be angry about the violence and sit in your chair and say that's somebody else's problem, or people can get involved. And I would encourage anyone who would actually think that way to say, maybe I can do something. Go to the website, www.psnchicago.org, and look at the different ways people can get involved, either being mentors to youth or finding a way where they can successfully give opportunities to convicted felons to go straight. And I'll give one pitch as to why that's not so crazy. I think people sometimes think, oh, this is Willie Horton. If I hire a felon, what's going to happen in my workplace? And do I want to be the one responsible for proposing that? Well, when people get out of prison, it's very easy for them to go back to doing what they were doing if they were selling drugs in a street corner. They know right where to go, and there's fast money. If you tell them you have to work for a decent wage, but not an exorbitant wage, and you have to work hard and do training and maybe work outdoors and maybe load trucks or work in rail yards and do physical labor,